Some people help out of kindness, others out of duty, but the rarest ones, they help without expecting anything in return, and that changes everything. Jake Sullivan had no idea that stopping at a grocery store would change his life. It had been a long day. Work had drained him, his old truck was running on fumes, and his 5-year-old daughter Lily had fallen asleep in the back seat, clutching her stuffed bunny. All he wanted was to grab some essentials and go home. But as he pulled into the parking lot, he noticed an elderly woman struggling to load groceries into her car. The bags were heavy, her hands shaking as she tried to lift them. Jake could have driven off. He was exhausted. No one would have blamed him. But that wasn't who he was. He parked, stepped out, and walked over. "Ma'am, let me help you with that." The woman looked up, surprised. Then she smiled. "That's very kind of you, young man." Jake returned the smile and quickly loaded the bags into her trunk. When he was done, she patted his arm. "People don't stop to help much these days." Jake shrugged. "The world's tough enough as it is." She studied him for a moment. "You have a kind heart." Her eyes flickered toward the truck where Lily was still sleeping. "Is she yours?" Jake's expression softened. "Yeah, just me and her." The woman's smile grew, but there was something unreadable in her eyes. "You're a good father." Jake chuckled. "I try." The woman opened her purse and pulled out a card. "Take this." Jake frowned, glancing down at it. Eleanor Whitmore. The name meant nothing to him, but before he could ask, she spoke again. "Come by this address tomorrow, trust me." Jake hesitated. "Why?" Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "Because good people deserve good things." She got into her car and drove off, leaving Jake standing there, completely unaware that he had just helped one of the wealthiest women in the country. And by tomorrow, his life would never be the same. The next morning, Jake sat in his truck, staring at the massive iron gates in front of him. He checked the address on the card again. This can't be right. Beyond the gates stood an estate so large it looked like something out of a movie. Manicured gardens, marble fountains, a mansion that could probably fit 10 of his tiny apartments inside. Jake exhaled, gripping the steering wheel. What was he doing here? Lily, sitting in the passenger seat, kicked her little feet excitedly. "Daddy, this place is huge." Jake chuckled. "Yeah, kiddo, it is." Before he could second-guess himself, the gates creaked open. A well-dressed man stepped outside, waving him in. Swallowing his nerves, Jake drove up the long driveway and parked. As soon as he stepped out, Eleanor Whitmore appeared at the front entrance, smiling warmly. "You actually came?" she said. Jake shrugged, lifting Lily into his arms. "You gave me an address. Figured I'd see what this was all about." Eleanor's eyes softened as she looked at Lily. "And who is this lovely young lady?" Lily grinned. "I'm Lily. Daddy says I'm his little sunshine." Eleanor laughed, glancing at Jake. "She's precious." Jake smiled. "She's my whole world." Eleanor nodded approvingly. Then she gestured toward the house. "Come inside. There's something I need to show you." Jake followed, his stomach twisting with nerves. This was the kind of place where people like him didn't belong. They stepped into a luxurious sitting room, and Eleanor motioned for him to sit. She poured tea, her movements graceful, practiced, like someone who had lived a life of elegance. Jake cleared his throat. "So, are you going to tell me what's going on?" Eleanor smiled. "Jake, do you know who I am?" Jake frowned. "Eleanor Whitmore." He shrugged. "Beyond that, no." She chuckled. "Most people recognize my name. I own Whitmore Industries." Jake nearly choked on his tea. "Wait, you mean the billion-dollar company?" She nodded. "That's the one." Jake blinked. "And you own it?" Eleanor smirked. "Every last share." Jake let out a breath. "Okay, but why am I here?" Eleanor leaned forward. "Because yesterday you stopped and helped someone without knowing who they were, and that tells me everything I need to know about you." Jake frowned. "I just did what anyone would have done." Eleanor shook her head. "No, Jake, that's where you're wrong. Most people would have ignored me, but you didn't." She took a deep breath. "I've been looking for someone like you, someone good, someone hardworking, someone who doesn't just chase money but does what's right." Jake felt his pulse quicken. "Looking for someone? For what?" Eleanor smiled. "To run one of my companies." Jake's jaw dropped. "Wait, what?" She nodded. "I own more than just Whitmore Industries. I have smaller businesses, ones that need someone trustworthy to manage them, and I think you're that person." Jake stared at her. This had to be a joke. Things like this didn't happen to guys like him. "I don't have experience running a company." Eleanor waved a hand. "You've run something harder. You've raised a child on your own. If you can handle that, you can handle this." Jake swallowed hard, glancing at Lily, who was happily munching on a cookie one of the house staff had given her. This wasn't just about him. This was about giving her a future. He turned back to Eleanor, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's the catch?" Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "No catch, Jake, just one condition." Jake braced himself. "What is it?" Eleanor smiled. "When the time comes, promise me you'll help someone else, just like you helped me." Jake felt his throat tighten. A billionaire had just changed his life forever, and all because of one small act of kindness. Jake sat frozen, trying to process what had just happened. A billionaire was offering him a life-changing opportunity, all because he had stopped to help her with groceries. It didn't feel real. He exhaled, rubbing his temples. "You're serious?" Eleanor chuckled. "Dead serious." Jake shook his head. "I don't know the first thing about running a business." Eleanor leaned forward, her gaze steady. "You know how to work hard. You know how to take care of people, and most importantly, you know how to do what's right. The rest, you'll learn." Jake hesitated. This wasn't just a job. This was a second chance at life, a way out of struggling paycheck to paycheck, a way to finally give Lily the stability she deserved. He glanced at his daughter, who was now happily swinging her legs as she finished her cookie. A better future for her. His throat tightened. "What kind of company?" Eleanor smiled. "I own a small chain of construction firms, ones that focus on affordable housing. The last manager, let's just say he cared more about profit than people." She tilted her head. "You've built things before, haven't you?" Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah. Spent most of my life in construction, before work dried up." "Then you already have the skills," Eleanor said simply. "And with the right resources, I know you'll do more than just run the company. You'll build something that matters." Jake let out a slow breath. "And if I say yes, what happens next?" Eleanor grinned. "You start Monday." Jake chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief. "You don't waste time, do you?" She smirked. "Neither do you." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the weight of something bigger. A new beginning. Jake reached across the table, shaking Eleanor's hand. "All right, I'm in." Eleanor's grip was strong, steady. "Good. Welcome to Whitmore Enterprises, Jake." That night, as Jake tucked Lily into bed, she blinked up at him sleepily. "Dad?" "Yeah, sweetheart?" She smiled. "Are we going to be okay now?" Jake swallowed past the lump in his throat, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yeah, kiddo," he whispered. "We are." As he sat back, staring at the ceiling, he realized something. One small act of kindness had led to this. And one day, when the time came, he would pay it forward. The best opportunities don't always come from chasing success. Sometimes they come from doing what's right when no one is watching. Monday came faster than Jake expected. Dressed in the best shirt he owned, he stood outside the Whitmore construction headquarters, gripping his daughter's small hand. The towering glass building felt intimidating, so different from the dusty construction sites he was used to. Lily squeezed his fingers. "Daddy, do you think they have snacks inside?" Jake chuckled, his nerves easing. "Kiddo, I think they have everything inside." The moment they stepped through the doors, a sharply dressed assistant greeted them with a bright smile. "Mr. Sullivan, Mrs. Whitmore is expecting you." Jake still wasn't used to being called Mr. Sullivan. It felt strange, like he was stepping into someone else's life. But as they were led through the sleek hallways, something inside him shifted. This was his life now. Eleanor was waiting in a large office, standing beside a corner desk that overlooked the entire city. She grinned when she saw Lily. "And here's my favorite little sunshine." Lily beamed. "You remembered." "Of course, dear," Eleanor said warmly, handing her a small gift bag. "I had a feeling you'd like a welcome present." Lily eagerly peeked inside, pulling out a stuffed bunny in a construction helmet. Her giggles filled the room. "It's so cute." Jake shook his head with a smile. "You didn't have to do that." Eleanor smirked. "I know, but I wanted to." Then she turned to Jake, her expression turning serious. "Ready for your first day?" Jake exhaled. This was it. He could still feel the calluses on his hands from years of hard labor, the exhaustion of struggling to make ends meet. But today he wasn't just surviving. He was building something real. He met Eleanor's gaze. "Yeah," he said firmly. "I'm ready." Eleanor smiled. "Then let's get to work." Months later, Jake sat at his own corner office, reviewing blueprints for a new affordable housing project. The same man who once struggled to keep his lights on was now in charge of building homes for others. Lily sat on the couch nearby, coloring happily. She would never know what it meant to struggle. And that was all Jake ever wanted. Just then, Eleanor walked in, watching him with quiet pride. "You know, Jake, I think this company was always meant for you." Jake chuckled, shaking his head. "I wouldn't have believed that a few months ago." Eleanor smirked. "And now?" Jake looked at the blueprints, at Lily, at his new life. He exhaled. "Now, I get it. Because sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of kindness. And one day, when someone else needed a second chance, Jake would be the one to give it." Real success isn't just about what you build for yourself. It's about what you help build for others.